Hi guys, my name is Mackenzie. Welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things personal finance, faith, and lifestyle. And today is a very exciting day because today we are going to be going over how to budget for beginners. I will be sharing my personal 6 steps that I take, steps that I recommend everyone to do when they're just starting out trying to build a budget and also trying to stay disciplined within that budget, but just not sure where to start. And before we dive in, I want to go ahead and explain the type of budgeting system that I use, which is a budgeting method known as zero-based budgeting. Essentially, when you're zero-based budgeting, every single dollar down to the penny has a job. Everything is allocated somewhere once you get paid. And no, this does not mean that you are living paycheck to paycheck. It just means that you're being intentional. So a high-level overview of what this would look like would be your income minus your bills, expenses, savings, investments, all of that. By the time you're done doing your budget, the number should be at 0. Every single dollar should be allocated to a specific place. So that doesn't mean every dollar is just going towards bills and then you don't have any more money until the next time you get paid. No, it means that even part of that money that's being allocated is going to savings or is going to your spending money, so that there's not just random money floating around and you have no idea where it's going. So now that you have an understanding of what zero-based budgeting is, let's get into step 1. The first thing that I recommend everyone does when they're starting to budget is listing out all of their reoccurring bills. I personally categorize bills and expenses differently, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But for now, think of your bills as recurring expenses that have a due date associated with them. These are things like your rent, your car insurance, subscriptions, credit card minimums, things like that you know have to come out and come out on a specific day each month. When you're writing down your bills, you're going to want to write down the due date for each bill as well as the exact dollar amount. This step is crucial, and it's very important that you're thorough with this first step because it will set the tone for the rest of your budget. Something that people do that gets them in a lot of trouble with their budget down the line after they've already set a budget is not realizing that they have a lot of monthly expenses that come out that they have not been tracking. So for example, subscriptions, maybe things that were supposed to be one-offs, but you just forgot to cancel it and now it's been coming out of your account on a consistent basis. The way that I personally recommend avoiding being charged subscriptions every single month that you don't intend to hold on to is to go to your app store, go to your profile, hit subscriptions, and it will list your active subscriptions and your inactive subscriptions. Now, this is for an iPhone specifically. I have an iPhone, so that's the interface that I'm working with. It might be different for Android users, but I would assume it's kind of similar. But that's where you can go in and see what you have coming out on either a monthly basis or even a yearly basis. Sometimes those things can really throw off a budget because it might not be something that you've been paying for month to month. But let's say you're doing really well on your budgeting journey and then 3 months down the line, you get hit with an annual subscription from something you signed up for a year ago and completely forgot about. You want to have all of these things in mind because recurring bills that you don't know you have can really throw you off. Also, depending on what email you use to sign up for these subscriptions, all of them might not be listed within your app store. So another thing that you probably won't want to do, but is important, is to go through your past monthly statements. I would say at least the last 3 monthly statements to see if there's any regularly recurring things that you're not thinking of off the top of your head. And if you can't be bothered to do that, I know that there are apps like Rocket Money and things like that. I've never personally used Rocket Money, but that's a way to track your subscriptions. But also keep in mind that I believe that's also a subscription-based service. So make sure that if you're using it, you just use it for what you need it for and then you get rid of it. But no matter what it is that you choose to do, you need to make sure that you have every single bill laid out. Once you have that done, that will lead us into step 2. which is to list your flexible monthly expenses. Now, as I mentioned before, I categorize bills and expenses differently. Expenses also have to come out on a regular basis, but I don't associate them with a due date. So for me, that would look like gas, groceries, tithing. Those are not things that have to be taken out on a specific date, but I do know that I will need gas and groceries every single month, and I also know that I am tithing every single month. So these are things that I want to factor into my budget as well. Now, I always recommend that you're realistic with these numbers. I know when you're budgeting, especially if you're watching this video because you're really struggling and very tight on cash, that's completely understandable, but it's important to be realistic because ultimately you don't want to set an unrealistic budget and then be breaking that budget month after month after month. So for example, with groceries, you need to eat. Make sure that you are budgeting enough money that fits within your dietary needs. And I'm not saying budget above your means either. Now, this is not meant for you to have a super extravagant grocery list, but you should have the things that you like and again, fit your dietary needs. So this is not something that I would lowball. I would do what's right for you. And again, if you're not exactly sure how much you spend on these expenses on average, go back into your accounts, and it's gonna feel like a tedious task, but you're gonna thank me later that you did it because it's just such an important step. Then once you have your bills and expenses laid out in front of you, I want you to do this little exercise. So take 3 different colored highlighters, let's call it green, yellow, and red. Personally, I would lay out my bills and expenses in front of me. Then in green, I would highlight what absolutely has to be paid for, whether I like it or not. So rent, utilities, the complete necessities. I want you to highlight those in green. Then I want you to highlight in yellow anything that you want that you don't want to have to give up, but would probably ultimately help you save money in the long run. And then I want you to highlight in red anything that you're like, wow, I didn't even know that I was still paying for this, or this is super unnecessary, or maybe there's a cheaper alternative. I want you to highlight those things in red because I want you to get rid of those things immediately, because I don't want you bringing anything into the final budget that really just doesn't belong in what you just really need to get rid of altogether. Then once you have your bills and expenses laid out in front of you, that will lead us into step 3. Now for step 3, you're gonna wanna calculate your net monthly income. This is going to be your take-home pay after taxes and deductions. You don't want to include those numbers in your mind. Now, I recognize having a salaried job makes this step a little bit easier because if you know exactly the amount that you're making on a monthly basis, it's a little bit easier to budget based off of that. But if you work an hourly wage, what I recommend doing in this case is how I mentioned, sort of highball your expenses like gas and groceries to make sure you have enough. In this case, I would lowball your income. I would not be basing it off of my best month. If you work hourly and your hours can be a little bit inconsistent or varies here and there, this is something that I would lowball and work off of the lowest possible amount of money that you can make. This way, if you wind up with additional money that you weren't expecting, that can go towards debt, savings, or even fun spending money. Next, this leads us to step 4, which is subtracting your bills and expenses from your monthly take-home pay. The reason why I suggest doing it in this order is because your bills and expenses have to get paid. So whatever is left over once you subtract that all out is additional money that you can allocate to things that you want but do not need. So again, this will go towards things like your spending money, your savings, and any additional payment towards your debt outside of just the minimum payment. Again, your minimum payment needs to go in with your bills. So for example, if your take-home pay on one single paycheck is $2,500, and let's say your bills and expenses for that pay period are $2,000 and that only leaves you with $500 left, then you will decide how you need to split that up based on your particular situation. Now, I always recommend giving yourself some spending money. Even if you are in debt, realistically, over the course of the time that you get paid to the next pay period, you are going to want to spend something. You're going to want to go live. And so again, this is not for you to prioritize if you're in deep debt or anything like that. But again, I believe in realistic budgeting and one that you can actually stick to. So if you were only left with $500 and let's say you are dealing with a lot of debt, then you would split that up based on a case-by-case basis. Maybe you would give yourself $200 of spending money for, let's say, that 2-week period, but then the additional $300 can go towards your credit card debt. Someone might disagree with that, and that's totally okay. Again, this is just my way of doing it. It's worked for me. It's worked for friends of mine, so I can only go off of that experience. But I think in a journey that can feel very scary and overwhelming, it's good to still feel like you're living and getting to be a part of outings and being able to treat yourself or your family without going overboard and without neglecting your responsibilities. Once you've completed the first 4 steps, that should leave you with $0 until the next time you get paid. Now, if you've successfully completed steps 1 through 4, there should be 0 additional dollars just randomly floating in space. Everything should have a job by this point. This leads us into step 5, which is to automate and to budget on payday. I would say, especially if you're new to budgeting, don't just rely on your motivation or your discipline. If possible, I would automate your bills and expenses. If your income is predictable, like mine is, I would suggest setting up auto pay for certain bills that you can. It doesn't have to be every single bill. And there's also been plenty of times in my life where my income was not stable, so I was not able to just set things for auto pay. Otherwise, I would have overdrafted my account so many times. So if your pay is unstable and unpredictable, I would highly recommend manually moving the money on payday. Now, this does require a bit of additional discipline on your end, but ultimately that's just kind of part of the financial journey and really anything in your life. If you have a goal, and clearly if you're watching this video, you probably have goals to budget and want to increase that discipline. So ultimately, while it can be scary, do what you need to do to try to make that easier for you, to make it more of a routine, because it does get easier once it's become a routine. For me personally, I allocate what I can and what I trust to auto pay by itself, and then I go ahead and manually move everything else the day I get paid. Now, the reason why I'm so strict about this and why I say it's important to do it the day you get paid is because life happens and you can get paid and just immediately start swiping your card. And if you start spending before your money is actually allocated, you could be overspending the second your check hits your account. For me, the only money that stays in my checking account after I get paid is money that needs to be auto drafted out of my account and spending money. Now, if you cannot trust yourself to not overspend your spending money and have them in the same account and having your spending money start chipping away at your bill money, have separate accounts for your spending money versus your auto pay bill money. And honestly, I would go ahead and recommend that anyway. I've been doing this a long time, so I don't personally do that, but I would highly recommend it. Just seems like a smarter route. And lastly, let's get into step 6, which is to check in on your budget weekly. Now, I recognize that most of us don't get paid on a weekly basis, but it doesn't matter to me. Even if you get paid bi-weekly or monthly, you should be checking in on your budget on a weekly basis. I say this for a couple reasons. One, because it helps me keep myself in check to make sure I'm not overspending. So for me personally, I get paid every 2 weeks. So I'll give myself spending money for the 2 weeks, but if I blow half of it the day I get paid, then that's a little alarming, because then I only have half of what I should for the next 2 weeks. Because I think even when it comes to making small purchases, if you swipe your card here, swipe it there, and it's a lot of little purchases, you don't really think about it too much and you could think that you're staying on track, but those things really add up. So I like to check in on a weekly basis to make sure that I'm still on track with my budget and that I'm not draining all of my spending money. Also, because some of my bills are on auto pay, this helps me avoid any sketchy transactions, or if somebody steals my card or something like that, or I'm being charged for something additionally that was meant to be overdrafted, I can catch that sooner rather than later, rather than just thinking that everything that I put into place is working just fine, and then all of these other things are happening in the background that I could have caught, and now maybe I'm being overdrafted or overcharged. And don't get me wrong, these check-ins are not to be overbearing or overly restrictive with yourself. It's to be proactive. And personally, the more that I avoid my budget, the more anxious I get. The head in the sand approach really never helps. The thing that is going to help you get in a good routine, get in a good flow, get out of debt is to get on a consistent budget where you are being disciplined and when you're being intentional about how you spend your money. Then once you subtract your bills and expenses from your income, this will give you the opportunity to go back to that exercise we did in the beginning, which was highlighting your bills and expenses based off of green, yellow, red, because this will inform whether or not you get to keep your yellow category. So once you subtract your bills and expenses that are necessary, the ones that are highlighted in green, you can go ahead and determine whether or not you are actually able to fit the yellow ones into your budget or not. And if not, they need to go into the red category, which is, unfortunately, I need to get rid of these things. I need to put them down for now, but that's not to say that later on I can't pick them back up again. All right, guys, so those are my 6 key steps that I take when budgeting. Those are always the things that I advise other people to do. And even if you are not in a good place financially today, it is just temporary. You might be in debt or living paycheck to paycheck, but all of that can change. I believe that you will be so much more empowered and be able to get out of that situation a lot faster if you start getting involved in your own budgeting and are intentional about the choices that you make with your money. I know up to this point it has probably seemed nearly impossible to budget or get out of the negative situation that you're in, but it truly just takes a bit of financial education and literacy, discipline, and consistency. And the hard truth is that more money will not fix bad money habits. You can make $10K a month and still be living paycheck to paycheck if you don't know how to manage it. I'm passionate about helping people steward their money well because it's given me so much peace of mind. So if I can do it, you can do it too. We are in this together. Even though I'm in a place where I am no longer living paycheck to paycheck, I still keep that education, that discipline, and that consistency to make sure that I'm still in a good place, because I recognize that I could really fall off at any point and that life happens and life really does come at you fast. God forbid I could lose my employment, I could take a pay cut, and I would still have to be responsible for stewarding my money well. So guys, if you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you can get future educational videos from me. And let me know in the comments, what is your biggest struggle when budgeting? I would love to cover it in a future video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.